evening, everyone. We welcome you all to OrthoTV Monday Motivation Webinar Series. And to introduce today's panelist and the speaker and topic, I hand over to Dr. Dhiren Ganjwala, President, Pediatric Orthopedic Society of India.
Good evening and welcome friends to this Monday Motivation program. Today we have a very unique topic, and today's speaker is Dr. Correa. He's going to speak about the Indian bosses and why this topic is very important for us, because we all know that now the practice is changing in India a lot. From private small nursing home, now corporate hospitals are now taking over. And in that case, most of the doctors are now also adopting to the role of leaders. And many of us are not trained to be our leaders. And in that case, what are the special qualities of Indian bosses is going to be very important. No doubt he's going to speak about non-medical leaders or the bosses, but still how to apply that to the medicine he's also going to focus on that also. So before I give him, I will just like to introduce our speaker as well as our panelist. So Correa is an experienced corporate professional, writer, and executive coach with more than 30 years of professional experience. His educational background includes he's from Xavier Schools of Management, a Chevening Scholarship, and a certification from NTL on organization development. He's a member of Sumedhas, which is in Jamshedpur, the Academy for Development of Human Processes. He has a vast professional experience in the leadership because he was with Hindustan Unilever, Xerox, Diageo, Patni, and Vodafone. We are really delighted to Steve because he has agreed to share his perspective on the uniqueness of Indian leaders. I was asking him, like, what is a special quality of Indian leaders? And he said that this is what I'm going to speak in my talk. So this talk is based on his recently published book about the Indian bosses. So he's going to share something about that also. Before I hand over to Steve, that is a book which Tushar was showing. So before I hand over to Steve, I would like to introduce our panelists also. We are really fortunate to have Dr. Gurava Reddy, who is a chairman of Sunshine Hospital, Hyderabad, and a very pioneer person and a leader in the joint replacement surgery. The best part of Dr. Gurava Reddy is like he's a very jovial fellow. And in addition to his lectures on joint replacement, people invite him to speak on the humor in medicine. So that is his special quality. Similarly, Dr. Parag Sancheti, again, a chairman of Sancheti Hospital, a very leading multi-specialty hospital in Pune. And he's also a great joint replacement surgeon, very innovative person, and he has many innovations on his name. We are very fortunate to have a unique panelist with us, Dr. Malay Mahadevia. Dr. Malay Mahadevia is, by qualification, he is MDS, a dentist, a pedodontist. But after working for a few years as a professor at Government Dental College in Ahmedabad, he decided to join Adani Group. And from that beginning in 1992, in a span of almost 3 decades, at present he is a group HR and he's managing more than 30,000 people. So he has a dual experience as a doctor and as a leader also. So we are really fortunate, and I invite all of you to this event. And now I hand over to Dr. Steve for his, sorry, not doctor, but Steve for his elaboration on the topic. Yes, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Dhiren Ganjwala, Dr. Parag Sancheti, Dr. Gurava Reddy, Dr. Satyen, Mehta, Dr. Ashok, Shyam, Dr. Malay Mahadevia, Dr. Neeraj, Dr. Tushar. It is really exciting for me to be in the midst of so many doctors in this panel and others listening this evening without me having a broken bone or any ailment with regards to my physical body. But the fact that you're actually going to be listening to me rather than operating on me. So thank you very much for this evening. I'm also delighted that despite the hour at 9 o'clock. There's so much of excitement and enthusiasm to listen. And I want to thank all of you, firstly, to take the time out the next 1.5 hours to spend the time with me listening in to what is hopefully going to be an insightful session on the title Discovering Indian-ness and the Indian Leader. So that's really the topic that I'm going to be spending. I will like for all of you to ask me questions at the end, though at some point in the course of the conversation, I would like to engage the panelists in responding to some of the themes that I bring out as part of this conversation. So although I've written a book, today's session is really about discovering Indian-ness and the Indian leader. And to start off, Desmond, I'm not able to get this going. One moment. Just give me a minute. Start this. 1 second. Yeah. So if all of you are comfortable at any point of time, you feel comfortable, just bring all your attention to yourself at this point of time and take a deep breath and relax. And whenever you feel comfortable, please close your eyes and bring all your attention to your breathing. And as you breathe in, relax. And the deeper you relax, the more fine is your breathing. And the finer you breathe, the more relaxed you feel. And bring all of your attention to this moment, sitting wherever you are and making a commitment, a sankalp, that you will bring all your attention to the discussion that follows in the next 90 minutes. And when you are comfortable, please open your eyes. And I will now start. As you all know, in the Indian tradition, we tend to use the diya because it really signifies purity, goodness, good luck, power. And the presence of light is really about expelling darkness and evil forces. And behind the diya is the mandala, which essentially signifies our deep connectivity with a powerful existence. The powerful existence between ourselves and the universe at large. So, as we go on to the subject today, which is discover Indian-ness and the Indian leader, the concept of leadership in the Indian tradition holds the notion that leadership is a journey, not a fixed destination. And it is constantly a pursuit, an inquiry, and symbolized by what the Upanishad itself says, not here, move on. So for us as Indians, unlike, let's say, in the West, what is it to be a leader is always contextualized to what is the emergent moment arising. And so for us, living with the fluidity of the context is one of the aspects of Indian leadership, because we live amongst questions, not amongst answers. But let me begin by telling you my own journey in terms of discovering Indianness and Indian leadership. It was way back in November 2011. I was attending an NHRD conference in Bangalore. A global speaker was addressing 1,100 or more HR leaders, and he was speaking about a leadership practice. Somebody in the crowd raised his hand and said, "You know what? We must follow our own leadership model. Uh, we have a rich tradition and an Indian context, and it obviously makes sense to follow our own Indianness and an Indian leadership." The global speaker at once requested if somebody from the audience could come up on the stage and say a few words. There was a stunned silence. It was very awkward. Someone finally got up, went to the stage, and made a few points. At that moment, I experienced an epiphany. I realized that my own knowledge of both Indianness and Indian leadership practice was unsatisfactory. During the tea time, in the weeks that followed, in the months that followed, when I spoke to many of my colleagues, I realized that for most of us, our foundational knowledge, both of Indianness and of Indian leadership, is woefully inadequate. Though the fact is, we follow it unconsciously, but beyond surface understanding and some intuition, there is very little attention given to it. So we've had, coming out of a colonial British administration, a lot of multinationals with a British way of administration. Then for a lot of time, we had the Japanese way of administration. Then we had the American way of administration. But we never ever pondered on the Indian way of management, which only now there has been a kind of an awakening based on a large number of Indians who are there in the S&P 500 and, of course, in the Indian context. When I realized that for most of us, we don't know Indianness, then what is it that we teach students who come from MBA institutes or from engineering institutes? Because while leadership is an art and a craft, in between the art and craft is business. And it is necessary that students of leadership should learn the ABC of business. So what did I do? I began to go on my own adventure to study Indianness and the Indian leader. Now, when you look at my own background, English speaking, English educated, Roman Catholic, urban, 35 years of work experience in corporates and professional, I wondered if I would be looking at Indianness from a kind of lens, which is mine, and therefore have its own subjectivity, its own bias, its own prejudice based on my own upbringing, and therefore also its own distortion. So apart from my own business experience, I decided to also look at ethic and emic lenses. Now, what is ethic? Ethic lens is outside in. What do people feel about leadership? And I discovered that most of the outside in literature has come to us on leadership from North America and Europe. Most of the leadership studies have come from the Second World War onwards. Most of it has come from the academia. That means the academics have created that body of knowledge and theories. Most of the knowledge has come from written by males, masculine perspective, and coming from research done on weird participants. What do I mean by weird participants? Participants who are Western, educated, coming from an industrialized nation, rich, and democratic. And as you can readily appreciate, listeners, the whole world is not weird. There is an oriental world, and the workplace, if it doesn't have feminine principles, because all the literature is written by males, then obviously it throws up some kinds of dilemmas. One of the interesting things about the ethic literature is that it tries to suggest that it has universal truths. And therefore, what is applicable to an industrialized nation is also applicable in Japan, China, India, and other parts of the world. But the reality is that that literature is as indigenous for Europe as our own literature is indigenous for India. And a lot of researchers, sociologists, when studying India, have realized that some of the well-known notions of the West's literature on leadership actually do not work in the Indian context. For instance, there is, for many psychoanalysts and psychologists, the whole notion of the Oedipus complex, which is father, mother, son. Whereas in the Indian context, many authors, including Girinder Bose, later Sudhir Kakkar, others, have talked about the maternal enthrallment. And really the triangle applicable in India is more in the area of mother-in-law, daughter-in-law, and son. And that triangle exerts a larger force. And many other studies, Macmillan's study on achievement versus what Uday Parag discovered in India. So when you look at the Indian study, which I call the EMIC, E-M-I-C, EMIC study, they throw up a very interesting nature of leadership. And one of the nature of leadership, one of the lenses of leadership is the lens of the ethnic card, which is very relevant to that of India. So, in short, while you can have a couple of seeds of leadership, thoughts, notions, to believe that these seeds can be thrown in any soil and it will flourish is fundamentally flawed. Because depending on the soil, a leadership practice will either flourish or it will flounder. And that's one of the reasons why I talk about Indianness and Indian leadership, so that we are able to understand the soil of Indianness. And this soil of leadership, of Indianness, is what I go on to elaborate as being the Kal, the Desh, and the Patra. And I'll go into more details. So, to summarize, one aspect of Indianness and the Indian leader is to look at it from my 35 years of experience. The other is to bring two lenses, the ethic outside in and the emic, the inside out, from this land itself of 7,000 years. And then I decided to do one more thing. I decided to go and check if some of the important leaders like Harsh Mariwal, Kiran Mazumdar, many other leaders, do they actually consciously or unconsciously, do they follow the practice of Indianness? Or is Indianness and Indian leadership some obscure notion that exists but is not really practiced? And then in the book, in the spotlight sections, having interviewed them, discussed with them many elements of how they think, feel, and act, I felt very validated that truly these stalwart leaders actually bring in, both consciously and unconsciously, a tremendous amount of Indianness, which they bring into praxis. And this includes aspects of, as we all know, cosmic collectivism, tolerance, harmony, co-holding differences, acceptance of differences, and adaptability. But more than anything else, a spiritual quotient which includes duties to ourselves and duties to others, with a strong sense of ethics, ecological balance. And there has always existed a hierarchical order coming from all the way from 7,000 years. And finally, because of the multiplicity of India, its regional collectivism. So these have been the notions that have existed. Now you can clearly see that India has got the distinction of being a 7,000-year-old living civilization. There have been many big civilizations: the Byzantine, the Ascetic, the Egyptian, the Roman, the Greek, but you've never had ever a civilization that's 7,000 years. And that 7,000 years has come through with many tributaries joining that river to where we are today. So, what is it that I am hoping, friends, that you will get out of today's session? What would I like for you to think, feel, and act? At the end of these 90 minutes, I'd like you to think about, certainly about Indianness and the Indian leadership. I would love for you to feel proud that you are part of a country that has this depth of wisdom. And I would have you act to discover your own personal leadership. So these are my objectives, my goals from our spending this time together. But we can do this, provided we have your attention, not just your ears of hearing, which is Shravana, but to have your understanding, which is Manana, but more than that, to be able to bring your contemplation with your own personal experience, which is what I call as the Nidhi Dhyasana. And for many of you who might have read Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and the 8 limbs, it is not in any way different to the last 3 limbs of Dhyana, Dharana, and Samadhi in the yogic tradition. And it is only through this kind of personal experience learning, by reflecting on your own truth, the inner truth, can there be true realization. Not by interrogating something scientific or something material outside. That has been the chief learning from our ancient texts. That truth is available to those. Somebody once said that the most scientific journey in its ultimate analysis lies in the journey of the inner search for one's own interiority. So let me begin by saying that over the next 40 minutes, we are going to talk about 3 big ideas. The idea of the East and West, the idea of Indian-ness, and the facets of the Indian leader. Now, before we start about East and West, I just want to tell you that by East and West, I don't mean Turkey to the right or to the left. Please remember, when I say East and West, I am referring to an orientation, an approach, an algorithm, a process, a method, which is inside you, which is inside you. In other words, you, Dr. Ganjwala, you, Dr. Reddy, have inside you an Eastern way of thinking and a Western way of thinking. You have both. And what is the Eastern and Western is what we will be discussing in a short while. But before I get to East and West, I'd like for you to answer a question in the chat box. Do you believe, and I'm asking this of the panel members because I don't have access to all the viewers on this program, but to the panel members, on the chat box, please write, do you believe that human beings are similar or distinctive? Just write capital D or capital S for similar or distinctive. If you believe they are both, you put down B. So B, S, or D. And I'll pause here. And Dr. Reddy says D. Dr. Sancheti says D. Dr. Ganjwala says D. Dr. Tushar says grossly D. Malay Mahadevia says D. And most of you on the panel are saying 100% D. I have done this now for many panels and for many people, and normally I get an answer of 75% D, 20% S, and I get an answer of 5% both. And here is my view. Here is my view. See, like we all know that as human beings, we have one head, one shoulder, one chest, 2 hands, 2 eyes. In that sense, all human beings are, physiologically similar. And many of the imperatives, many of the challenges, many of the issues, many of the dilemmas that face human beings across the world universally are similar. However, however, how societies, how groups, how cultures respond to those dilemmas, issues, challenges are cultural, and therefore distinctive. Like, let's take the recent case of the COVID. There are some cultures which have prioritized saving lives. There are some cultures initially that have prioritized saving economy, and both have then gone on to embrace the other. So, when I start with this whole notion of looking at cultures, then maybe let me begin by sharing a little story of the two porcupines that you can see on the screen. This was introduced by a guy called Arthur Schopenhauer. And he said in 1851 that on a cold, dark winter night, two hedgehogs, they approach each other and stick to each other for warmth. If they come and stick too much, they will hurt each other with their spines. So they figured out that it was practical to have the porcupines a little bit apart. There are some cultures which like to stick to each other and don't mind a little bit of pain. Panelists, please write down, do you think Indians and India are more sticky or less sticky? Just put M or L. Are more sticky or less sticky? So clearly, all the panelists are saying Indians are more sticky, and that's true. We are ready to bear more pain that comes from closeness. And unlike the West, we don't have a problem with wanting privacy and me time, and the more the merrier in a crowd. We enjoy crowds, we celebrate in crowds, and we love family and the intimacy of families. Even if part of being inside the family is to get some amount of pain by amount of people saying nasty things about you or rude things about you, etc., etc. So what's the point? The point I'm making is that if you want to look at a binary, there are some cultures that are more sticky, which I call collectivism, and there are some cultures which are more independent and like to have the independence for themselves. And from that, these two worlds, one can get a glimpse of the kind of cultures and orientation to the way the society is run. Now let's begin your quiz of whether you, Dr. Reddy, or you, Dr. Sancheti, have got an Eastern orientation or a Western orientation or both. So look at these comments I make and think about whether you are Eastern or Western. The first comment. In a Western orientation, there is a belief that there is one good life. Many of the Abrahamic philosophies, Judaism, Islamism, Christianity, have the notion that in the end, there is one life and then there is an eternal heaven. And there are other cultures which believe that you will come back multiple times. And it doesn't matter what the belief systems are about one life or multiple lives. But these belief systems trigger whether you see time as synchronic or chronological. And the way time gets set up, like for example, in music, The music in Western music is sharps and flats, whereas in Indian music it will be in circular formation, or the dance is circular, versus the ballet, which is quite vertical and horizontal in the Western world, and so on and so forth. So, what is your orientation? Are you one good life or many lives? Point one. Point two, are you I oriented or we oriented? If you talk to Joe Blogs and you say, tell me about yourself, Joe, he'll say, I've been a good student. I used to always be in the top 5 in my class. I've been known to be a good team player. I've been known to be very good in sports. I. On the other hand, if you speak to Ram Bahadur and say, tell me about yourself, Ram. Ram would say, I am from this particular village. My father was so and so. My grandfather was so and so. We come from this particular caste or class. I'm married to this lady. She's from there. I have 2 children. I, in the context of we, I am selected from a collective. And so, dear listeners, do you think you have an I orientation or a we orientation? And the reality is that we have both. We like to do well in class and be competitive, but we also say we're doing this because we have to do well for our family and get good marks. So, I or we? The third is that there are some cultures which are very much concerned with the physical and the social. So the I and the me, based on Herbert Mead, is about man living as a good citizen. Because the belief is that if man is left to himself and is natural, the natural force, which is of being a beast, will come up. So constantly man has to be made into a good citizen, and therefore the need for rules and regulations. So there is the good society, and the whole orientation is towards the physical and the social being. And finally, there is the parthood, which is you take out one element of the equation, you keep the other one small part in a control group, you look at the relationship between this part and the larger piece, you try and establish causal relationship, you do experimentation, and this is what is called a scientific experimental reductionist methodology, which allows you to analyze and be analytical. And so, dear doctors on this call, uh, are you parthood or fullhood? Is a question I'm asking. Is also what I'm asking in terms of a Western orientation. Now let me come to the Eastern orientation. And remember, as I said, that we have both an Eastern and a Western. It's not that we are A or B. We're not a binary. We have both. So when I come to the Eastern notion is that of the Trimurti. Like we started by doing a little bit of breathing. So you breathe in, and then you create, you consolidate, and then you breathe out, and that is the death and the destruction. So for us, do you believe that we are constantly in the process of creating, destroying, and consolidating perpetually? What is your belief system? Do you believe that it's all cyclical or that there is a sequential? The second Eastern belief is that it is we. I am often minimized, reduced to amplify the we. I am part of my family. I am part of this club. I am part of this society. I am part of this community. I am part of this village. I am part of this tradition. So we have this notion of apna. And the opposite of apna is obviously the notion of pariah. Now, our apna and pariah is a very interesting piece. It can be apna for just our families when we need it, or that COVID is just around our neighborhood. It could be, apna could be enlarged when, let's say, I'm in Bangalore and I'm interested in supporting the IPL, RCB team, and the apna could be very large when we are going to war with a neighboring country. So this collapsing of apna or the extension of apna is one of the realities that is there in our emergent society. And of course, then the opposite becomes pariah. And in my book, I talk about the management of the boundaries. Once one holds psychologically what is apna, and therefore by default, what is pariah, and how does the boundaries between one and the other get managed. The third big difference is that while in the West, in some societies, about happiness and bungee jumping and adventure and living the life fully, in the Eastern culture, it's about eliminating dukkha, suffering. And there is a belief that actually we are suffering because there is ignorance, there is avidya. And all the kleshas, which is what Patanjali writes, the klesha around attraction, repulsion, the fear of death, etc., is because we haven't realized the ultimate reality. And this metaphysical aspect makes some cultures wear rings with different stones, believe in Vastu, believe in horoscope, because there's always the belief that there is some super elements that's guiding us. In fact, many Indians would even say that whatever is happening for the good, that there must be some forces of beyond our control that is leading us, etc., etc. Whereas some cultures would say that it's up to you to pick up the oar and to do things. And some culture would say, no, sometimes you have to put your oar down and let the wind drive the sail. So what is your orientation? And finally, the Eastern culture has this wholeness, the pattern that everything is interconnected with everything else, that all the people who are in our lives, they were here for a purpose, that we are connected with everybody else. And so, gentlemen, at least in the panel now, would you please write down in the chat, are you East, are you West, or are you mixed? E, W, or M? So we have some panelists, most panelists, saying, I am mixed, I'm East and West. And one panel member saying, I am East. And actually, the reality is, according to my research, that as Indians, we are mixed. We have a 7,000-year river that has one system that's operating, one system that's operating. And then we have a postmodern, post-colonial, post-Western intervention, post-English education, post-scientific revolution model, model of a postmodern world, of which we are all inheritors. So we are living in the juxtaposition of a primary and a secondary system. And both are operating on us at this point of time. And if there's one thing that I want you all to remember, is this one sentence. In order to be an effective leader, one has to integrate the East and the West inside you. Yes, Dr. Ashok Shyam, one has to integrate your East and West within you in order to be a great leader. And those who have integrated the East and West, either outside India or in India, have turned out to be great leaders. But I must tell you, and I think Dr. Ganjwala in the beginning was asking me, you'll tell us something beautiful about the Indian leaders. I'm sorry to disappoint. In my research, I find that a large majority of Indian leaders, at least in the world of corporates that I am aware of, have not been able to integrate their East and West, and are therefore three Shankus. The handsome king, who was neither in heaven nor on earth, but suspended in limbo. Because what got him there here is not getting him anywhere else. Because there's a leaning on either being too Eastern with one kind of style, and there are many firms which are very Western, very masculine principles, very, very logical, rational, and also has a problem. And unless organizations are able to integrate the Eastern and Western, and unless the individuals integrate the Eastern and Western, it will lead to organizational waste and individual decay, is the point I wish to make. The way to explain this is perhaps to also say that suppose you are in Bombay, in NCPA theatre, watching a Shakespearean play. Somebody in the play is saying, to be or not to be, Hamlet. The fact is, the actors are Indian, the audience is Indian, the place is India, the stage is Indian, and yet we are doing a Shakespearean theatre and Shakespearean English play. And that is the situation today in India. We are having Indian-ness inside us, and we are following some Western practices. And we have to integrate. Now, I have worked for many multinationals, and it requires some integration to be able to make it relevant to the soil in order for it to be practiced. Desmond, one moment. Desmond. Now, my battery is running low. I'm just going to get some help. Desmond. The battery is running low. I'm now going to move to the second concept, which is the idea of Indian-ness. And this goes back to the panel members. Please write down, when you hear the word Indian-ness, write one sentence or one word that comes up for you when you hear the term Indian-ness. Please begin. So Dr. Satyen Mehta says family. Dr. Parag Sancheti says culture. So in doing this with many groups, a lot of different words have come up. Like, for example, Dr. Reddy saying empathy, apnapan, concerned about other people, empathy, and so on and so forth. Yes, all of these are the notions of Indianness. I had already discussed with you the ethic and emic, and it's very important that when you're looking at Indianness, with what kind of darshana, with what kind of eyes are you looking? Because unfortunately, I have found that much of our history is actually quite distorted or misunderstood. We have been misunderstood. Also, if you look at certain things from only an ethic lens, you'd be very hard pressed to explain why the staff in Taj Hotel did not escape when the terrorists came. Why did they stay back when they knew all the back doors? Has it got to do anything with the notion of the strong Indian tradition that our guest is God? In my book, I give references of the Harvard case study and the film that has been made on this episode, if any of you are interested. We also have to study India from what I said in the beginning. We are not weird. Our background has come from agrarian collectivism, apnapan. And in that kind of a feudal structure, what is the kind of orientation we have got? So, what I want to say, friends, is that I believe that today, particularly in the COVID times we face, in the times where the world is where we are heading to, I believe that we need a blend of the Harvard and the blend of the Rishi. And we need a Rajeshri leadership model. And I'm hoping that we prove Rudyard Kipling wrong, who said the East is East and the West is West, and the twain shall never meet. So we need leadership that is thinking global, Shubh Labh, the world is one family, ecological balance, ahimsa, dharmic traditions and principles, and acting Indian with an ability of being adaptive and resilient, humbleness, empathy, family values. And that's what I meant by thinking global and acting Indian. It's not about thinking global like being a Western and competing with the West, but it's having this larger existential purpose and rooted in an Indian ethos. Many years back, there was a gentleman called Eric Fromm, later a well-known author, Yuval Harari. He writes this book, Sapiens and Homo Deus and so on. They talked about social character. And what is social character? Social character is the prevalent, dominant ideas of our times. For example, we believe democracy is good. We believe capitalism is good. We believe meritocracy is good. Now, there might have been a time when we believed a ruler was good, a feudal lord was good. We might, many years from now, believe euthanasia is good. We might believe that today giving a lethal injection is good versus putting somebody on a cross. And for us, in terms of social character, we say, but why are we arguing about capitalism or democracy and so on? I mean, it's obvious, yeah, democracy and capitalism is so obvious. It's supposed to be the right ideas. Social character is about the right ideas that the society believes in and doesn't question. For example, in India, we have got many social characters. We have a social character about respecting our parents, respecting our teachers, respecting the age, looking after them when they're old, keeping our dirty shoes outside the door, etc., etc. I've written a number of Indian social characters that either have come from ancient heritage or from our modern legacy. And from time to time in India, there has been the Yug or the times, the Kal, Yug. And the time creates the idea, and the Desh creates the propensity. So there is no one India. There is a North India, South India, a fish-eating Bengali, vegetarian South Indian, so many languages and so many rivers and so many kulas. In fact, when money comes from abroad by Indians to India, it doesn't come to India, it comes either to Kerala or comes to Goa or comes to a Desha which is part of India, regional collectivism. And finally, for many people, the English have a word in the Western world called competency, trait, characteristics, personality. We have the notion of patra, which is the three guna of the, the tamasic, sattvic, rajas quality, the essence of the human. And this creates the soil on which the seed of leadership can flourish. And unless we understand the soil, the Indian-ness, and unless we understand the nature of the soil, we are never going to become clear about our own possibilities and our potentialities. Now, because you have got a 7,000-year river, and because you have got a postmodern upbringing, you have gone to college, studied science, reductionists, then there is always going to be some conflict. Because in the Western thinking, on the y by x axis, there is a diagonal, and it is told that if you go up the diagonal, there'll be a pot of gold waiting for you at the end of the diagonal, which is the Homo economicus, some reward. So you're constantly striving, hum honge kamyab ek din. And you're not thriving. And somebody who's sitting and thriving and happy and content, we say he has lost, the fire has gone out of his belly. He has become a sadhu, or he has come to the fourth stage of the ashramas. So one culture celebrates, and today in our world, it has become a very result-oriented, make money, grow rich, have a name, have recognition, and then we have the cultural values of 7,000 years of Shubh Labh and the world is one family. And this pull and push, this yin and yang between the two auxiliary and secondary systems that are operating in ours, inside us, is creating polarities, contradictions, dilemmas, and paradoxes. And Indian wisdom has got the answers. Has got the answer that, for example, stop nonsense talking about man and woman. Talk about nar and nari, yin and yang, anima and animus, because we have to talk about the human. And within the human lies feminine and masculine principles. That's why the goddesses have got a sword and the male god has got a kamal. And it requires individuation and integration rather than talking about man is from Mars and women are from Venus. And the more we talk about the social gender, the deeper we widen the chasm and perpetuate the problem rather than recognize the root cause, which is the patriarchy from Adam and Eve and Ram and Sita and so on, the patriarchy that exists in the society. But for us, the Indian word is dharam sankatas, which is the recognition that life will constantly have opposing pulls and pushes, and we are constantly in a world of integrating and managing these dualities. I won't go into this, Taj, I talked about it, but in the workplace, I am not talking about us competing with the US or working for a multinational or United States. I'm simply talking about the East and West inside you. And how do you integrate that to be an effective leader? Point one. I am talking about Cyrus Mistry and Ratan Tata, two cultures colliding and clashing. I am talking about Narayan Murthy and Sika from Infosys, two different cultures, one leaning towards one side, one leaning towards the other side. It is this understanding of the mixed culture inside us, or it is about understanding the duality that exists outside us and recognition of the East and West. It is through this understanding and awareness that we would end up becoming effective leaders. So that's really the take home that you need to think about is how do I bring individuation and integration? And how do I bring about integration and individuation within myself and within the system? How do I bring the self with managing the system? Aurobindo, before we even became independent, talked about mother and about the essence of the Indian-ness, having four rich qualities. You can read more about it in my book. I want to end off by saying that your Indian-ness, my friends, is not because you're a Ladakhi or you're from Kanyakumari or because you are a Bengali or because you are from Maharashtra, not because somebody wears a sari, someone wears a kurta. Your Indian-ness is what you choose, select is your Indian-ness. It is always going to be your choice. Let no one define what your Indian-ness is. It is up to you to decide what it is to be an Indian. And with that, I'm going to come to the final part and 2 slides of the final part, which is what is the facets of the Indian leader. So far, I have used only the first 2 chapters in my book. The remaining 9 chapters are about the facets of the Indian leader. And I say facets, I don't say traits. Facets. Because man is not a noun. Like, he is an introvert or he's an extrovert, or he is judgmental and he is perceptive, or he is feeling, he is thinking. These are very reductionist, westernized labeling and categorization, which might be useful for maybe something material, perhaps, but not for a dynamic spirit, which is man. For man, according to me, is both the being, the Atmic self, and the becoming, the socialized self. And the being and becoming are constantly in a state of dynamic interaction, engagement, and social reconstruction. So if you imagine this picture as being, let's say, the river Ganges, and think of it coming from Gangotri, then wherever the slope is very quick, uh, then the water will come. The water, being the human spirit, will flow very fast. And at Rishikesh, if the banks are very wide, the water will slightly widen. And if there are turns and twists in Varanasi and sand, it will slow down. And if it meets rocks, it will turn into a rapid. And if there's big gaps between two rocks, it will turn into a waterfall. In the same way, man will behave depending on the environment. Man is this in this environment, and he is that in that environment, and he's much more. So someone like Dr. Ganjwala could be very passive, very quiet, very non-violent. But if there are 10 goons who come to your house one night with arms and weapons to do harm to you and your family, it is most likely that you will end up becoming violent to respond to the situation at hand. So depending on the situation, and this is something that Ramanujan has clarified by saying that Indians are very context specific. That's why Indians say it all depends. And the reason is because dharma, which is Indians' word to the world, is contextual. So we have got different types of rules. Unlike the West, has got a rule is a rule is a rule, which is equal for all. We believe in equitability, not equality. So, for example, in a family of 5 children, someone will get milk who's a good student, someone will get a stick who's a good player, depending on gifting, depending on needs. And for different situations, we are required in the context to come up with the right, depending on the station, depending on the kind of kul or family, depending on the circumstances, and even in emergencies like the Apadharma, we have got certain principles. And even Mahatma Gandhi, rejecting the British legal law, said, I reject this law because I follow the eternal law, which is what he referred to as dharma. And ahimsa is another concept which is not about offering the other cheek when someone slaps you on the other, but to be able to bring violence to an end, even if one has to have recourse to violence. So said Krishna to Arjun. So said Bhishma to Yudhishthir. And there are many other concepts of Indian-ness, which is world is one family, Sankatan Sukta, and so on, is what I refer to the book. So I have, in the remaining 9 chapters, gone to describe Desi leader as directive and nurturant, and E for something, S for something, and I've gone on to explain the Desi leader. And I say that, for example, let's take the first one. The Indian leader is directive and nurturant, which is what JBP Sinha has said. He is the nurturant task leader. He's the Adhikar and the Anurag. He's actually dad, who's aloof, disciplinarian, strict, principled, nurturant, protective. And in the organization, in the Indian organizations, we have made our bosses dad. And many of the problems with making the bosses dad means that we have ended up becoming children And therefore, there is sibling rivalry, passive aggression, manipulation, lobbying, and so on and so forth that I write about. And many of the Western models, like charismatic leader, is actually narcissistic. Laissez-faire leaders ended up becoming an absentee landlord. Democratic leaders ended up becoming weak and perceived as such. And I go on to explain that in India, power, as understood in the West and understood in India, are quite different. Power in India is necessary for sneha and shraddha. And so I go on to explain each of these concepts in terms of what is it that makes the leader effective in the Indian context, is what the rest of the book clarifies. I'm going to stop here because I've gone beyond the 1 hour that we had kept for once this
Yeah, I think we have lost him. Now,
lost him at the right time. He's completed his talk.
yeah, that's good. So now I ask our the panelists, the first Dr. Gurava Reddy, then Dr. Sancheti, and then Dr. Mahadevia. How will you apply his understanding of the Indian-ness to your practice, to your situations? Do you think that is it possible for you to apply his understanding of the concept in your day-to-day practice or in your managing the people?
Yeah, definitely. I think that
Yes, Dr. Guru Reddy, you first.
Yeah, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, yes, go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. That Indian-ness is definitely a very unique character which all of us have and should have. And in the leadership, definitely our people work with us, not for us. Unlike the Western, the pink slips and all that, here the people are loyal and they work with us. That ownership and boss is going to take care of us. That feeling is there, and that adds a lot of times to the welfare of the organization. How much you pay will never equate to that ownership and loyalty. And that is the single most factor which all the bosses like us, Parag or myself, will have, and that is reflected time and again. For example, let us say there is a big cyclone, the hospital is inundated with water, everybody will come and work for that, and everybody will be there. So that is the spirit, and I think that Indian-ness is very unique.
Okay. Yes, Parag. What? How will you apply this to your practice?
Yeah, so it's an interesting talk. It's a different concept. You know, he tried to cover many different points. Hi, welcome back.
Sorry, I had a power outage.
Yeah, Steve, I was asking them a question like how they will going to apply your concept to their practice.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll just,
please, Parag.
Yeah, quickly. Should we just finish the talk and then I'll give my comment?
No, I have stopped. I'm over with all my slides. So please go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, you know, he told us about the East and the West, and that was a good comparison. And I think we are a mix of both, East as well as West. And I think we are unique in the sense that we can adapt to any culture. And that's the thing which also has been brought about by Steve Correa. Another thing which I feel is the Indian-ness sometimes is not discovered, and we continue to do or sometimes, you know, imitate one particular thing without really thinking what it is. So that is something which I feel we need to discover in ourselves. We need to go into more detail and you know, bring that Indian-ness alive. So that is something which I got from Steve Correa's talk.
Okay, yeah, Malay.
See, from my perspective, I think the leadership, first of all, is different in different perspective. That means that if the business leadership is different, social leadership is different, family leadership is different. And in each area, the requirement in terms of, if you look at it as a concept, what Eastern and Western, that what we were talking about needs to be applied as what is required. I personally feel that in every aspect, both are required, the proportion will change. When you're talking about business leadership, you are doing it for your stakeholders and you're talking about the actual outcomes. And you cannot really go away too much from that, because you have that larger responsibility to your stakeholders. So in that scenario, as required, and every business, every project, whatever that you're doing is at different stages. And depending on the stages, probably you will have to apply, whether it is you call it Western or Indian, but it's about having that, striking the right balance. And the same thing in terms of leadership at other places, it's different. So conceptually agreed, it has to be both. And I think each one of us, if we leave behind our hypocrisy and so-called emotional connect, I think we put things in the right perspective. It's the balance that we need to strike for every individual is different and every situation is different. So it's the right usage of both. There are best of both that we need to put in line with what the requirement is and the person that you are dealing, or the team that you are dealing, and the outcome that you are looking for.
Okay, like the question which I was thinking from the beginning, why he has used the term boss instead of leader? What is the difference between this term, the boss and the leader? Is it the same or it's different? Yeah, Gurava Reddy, what do you think about this?
Boss has got a bit of a derogatory connotation. In the sense, boss is over, and leader is a man who is much more empathetic and carries the people with him. I would rather be called as a leader than a boss.
Yeah, sir, I think you can
so
choose
boss probably
your
gives a more of a.
you can choose your leader, but you cannot choose your boss. Your boss is your boss. So you can choose to follow a different person.
Yeah, Steve is here, so let's ask him this question. Like, you have used the word boss instead of leader. What is the reason for that?
So I would love to believe that we have got Indian leaders in India. The reality is that there are bosses. And I said that you are a leader when you're able to integrate the East and the West. But today in the country, we have a large number of bosses.
Yeah, boss, there is a bit of a pun intended quote. Boss is like a diaper. He's full of shit and always on your ass.
So is this in your
Satyen,
talk?
can you now ask? Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, the question is for Dr. Correa, but if he's unable to answer, we can go on to Dr. Sancheti also for it. In our workplaces, there is the Indian workplace has a system of hierarchy. So it comes from the top, whatever the boss, whatever the leader, whoever says, everybody else follows that. And there's not much discussion on that. It goes more along the lines of, you are subjected to it. You are almost worshipping that person. You need to all have to come in line with that view. Whereas in the West, there would be more openness. It would come from bottom up. There would be exchange of ideas, discussions, and then they come to a conclusion and then they go ahead. So, although in one way there are advantages of both of them, what do you think about this? How does it work in the hospital practice of yours in our hospitals? How should we take this further?
So, as it was being echoed, the difference between the boss and a leader. Of course, even though we always want to be called leaders, in India, it doesn't really work that way. As Steve Correa was saying that, the reality is there are more bosses. I remember there was one person in Pune, and when I went to meet him, there on his table, it was very written, and there was a big sign that the buck stops here. So if that's the kind of person he is, I really didn't like that you cannot say that and you cannot display it, It was just like he felt that there's nobody bigger than them. So coming back to answer your question, one has to really integrate your people. They should feel that you're approachable, your door is always open. And, that kind of atmosphere has to be instilled. Sometimes hospitals don't work necessarily similar to industries. I would be happy to hear Dr. Malay also. It's a little difference in the culture when you're talking about industries and when you're talking about hospitals. Even though the basic principles of management don't change, there is a difference. In the hospital, one has to really take care of their doctors who are I still believe one of the important people in the whole system,
So
as
be
well
more
as your,
pragmatic.
yeah,
Take everybody along.
yeah. And then, your staff, of course, your ward boys, your nurses, all those people have to be really taken care. And there is the system which you have to develop. So, I tried at times to inculcate that once I came back from the US and, okay, let me sit with the ward boys and have coffee with them and during in between surgeries, but that doesn't work. You can't do that. So there has to be something different. You cannot necessarily follow all those principles. And I remember once I'd gone to Hyderabad actually, Gurava, and at that time I met this Satyen Computers chief, Mr. Ramling Raju, and he was sitting in the cafeteria very easily, and probably he didn't care what people felt, and he was just sipping his coffee. And I went and met him, and I was wondering who this guy is. And I didn't imagine that he would be, the chairman of the company. So we cannot do that in the cafeteria. I cannot sit with my maushi and sip coffee. It gives a different connotation. So I think that's a difference, and that is what the whole thing is. You have to adapt to the particular industry. So that's how I would answer your question, Satyen.
So I'll take this further to Dr. Malay. Sir, taking this discussion further, we struggle to sometimes have the balance between a professional and a personal relationship. As Indians, we want to be more personal with with our colleagues, with people whom we are working with, especially your juniors here. But I'll give you a small example from my end. I was getting a little pally with my driver because you're with him all the time, and then you start talking, and then after a month or so, he then starts talking about his problems, and then he asks me for a loan. So you struggle to maintain that. So what is your view on how do you deal with this, and how should we take it further in hospitals?
I tell you, healthcare, and I'll say this with all humility that though I come from with a kind of 3 decades of experience, obviously in infrastructure, but healthcare has been very close to my heart, and I've been very closely associated. While we talk about everything, but if you see the practices in healthcare, I think it is the most probably exploiting, be it corporate, be it doctors or say supporting staff. I think each one is exploiting the other. So when the corporates talk great things, I think they are exploiting doctors. When doctors say that, it's the corporate exploiting. I think it's all about that, which is typically happening when the economy is based on something which is feeling of lacking in spite of having everything. This is the culture that we have developed. So I personally feel it's not very different when it comes to leadership or the managerial practices. Then its sectoral differences will come, and those nuances are applicable in every sector. That is fine. But we are trying to discuss more on the leadership, which we could not. But when question comes of leadership, those competencies that we are talking about will require the similar kind of traits at every level, which we are missing. And we are missing, in a big way. So I don't see those qualities even in healthcare, whereby, if we practice that, we will be able to resolve those issues. So it is not something different. It is not very peculiar. You will find you come across, on the other side and then see the similar problems that you will find. And that there are some solutions that people apply. Even there, people will fail. To answer your questions about solving the problem in healthcare, go back and follow a very simple standard. Are we really open? Are we transparent? Are we really playing in team? Are we really giving, as somebody said, that is it equitable? Is it something that are we? When you start asking those questions, if the answer comes in genuine way, probably no. Then in that case, the solutions are very far. But if we are genuinely practicing what we believe and what we are saying, I think the answers will be, easy. In my opinion, I think as doctors, as in healthcare professionals, if we keep away our egos out, and which is true for, and maybe more so in healthcare, if we keep that away and start counting people in equality, I think the solutions are there. And I can tell you that these practices are there in many, many industries outside healthcare that probably we need to learn from.
Dr. Correa, since we have you, Dr. Reddy was saying that there is a lot of loyalty that he gets from his staff. And this is something which is a very Indian concept or an Eastern concept, and they don't leave him that easily, and they are there for him whenever he needs. But we've seen people like nursing staff or who just leave the job for maybe 1,000 rupee more increase in salary and would jump to another job at the drop of a hat. What are your views on that?
See, this loyalty and meritocracy, for some strange reason, seems to be seen as opposing forces, as if those who are loyal don't have merit and those who are meritocracy don't need to be loyal. Quite recently, I've written an article, I'll probably even send it to you all on the LinkedIn, which is, as long as there is contribution and there is continuity, you need both. You need contribution and you need continuity. And if you're getting both of it, then loyalty is definitely as important as contribution. And great organizations, if you look at many of the multinationals and Indian companies, whether you've had great contribution and great amount of longevity in those organizations, like HDFC, for example, the CEO has been there for many, many years and so on. And there's so many such examples. And this loyalty has to be a two-way street. If you look at what has been happening today to organizations, and let's take COVID times. If you get rid of people during an emergency and a bad time, in a society which essentially believes in trust, once that trust is negated with your suppliers, with your employees, with your staff, trust, which is a very important currency in the Indian context, if that is vitiated, it is very difficult to get it back. So those aspects need to be understood in terms of how we take decisions when it comes to an Indian context.
The last question, because we are coming to the end of the session. Quick question, Parag, what do you think a typical quality or your salient feature as a leader, and from where you got that quality? I'm going to ask the same question to Malay and then Dr. Gurava Reddy also. So what is your salient feature which you consider as a very important quality?
See, the most important quality, and I'll keep this short, is to take your team together, is to instill confidence in your team, and to tell them that even if they make mistakes, it's okay, but they have to take the responsibility and they have to be responsible for whatever decisions they take, right or wrong. If they take it right, they will get a pat on the back from the leader. If they are wrong, don't worry, they will be, the leader will come and will bail you out of it. So I think that's one quality, if you can have as a leader and let your team know it and integrate that, I think the team will always be with you. And it has to be, the trust. You have to trust them, and it's a give and take relationship. So it's not only one way. So these are the two things which I feel are important, and that would really define a leader. And that's what I try to follow, which I have learned from my father.
Okay, so empower the staff or your team. That's the one thing, and the trust. These are the two important qualities which you consider are very important. Malay, what do you think important? Now I'm
So,
asking from a healthcare perspective.
and I think I'll go back again, Dhiren. Please do not leadership. Do not differentiate. Leadership is leadership. The managerial quality, or when you say boss, I also look at it from the managerial perspective. Could be different. When you talk about leadership qualities, in my opinion, very simple. First of all, leader has to be transparent. The transparency is something that people watch you. These people watch your behavior, what you do and what you say. And people know exactly. You think you can fool them, you can't. So transparency is one thing. Second is you give them clarity. It's so important that what clarity you bring to the organization and the people who work for you. Third thing is what kind of accountability you really give them. How really you make them accountable with clarity in terms of what they are supposed to do. Fourth is how do you really reward them? In that, while you talk in good English, Hindi, Gujarati, saying that you've done a great job, but when question comes of really rewarding them, I don't mean in terms of money. I mean in terms of every aspect and especially the career. Are you really thinking of their future? In terms of what is the growth? Is that something that you are giving? And as what Dr. Sancheti rightly said, it's about trusting them. It is about having that trust in them and provide that courageous commitment in terms of whatever that you are wanting to convey to them. So in my opinion, it's about transparency, clarity, giving them career, giving them appreciation, rewards for their whatever that they've delivered, and having trust in them and being committed to them. That's the basic quality of any leadership anywhere.
Thank you. And Dr. Gurava Reddy, what is your quality?
In one sentence, I manage them with my brain and I lead them with my heart.
Wonderful.
Good.
So that's what I would have been. Because as other people said, healthcare, you cannot run it like a software industry. Software people, even they're not involved, they don't care what is the industry looks like, it doesn't matter. But in healthcare, if right from Maushi, the security boy or the fourth class employee do not have that involvement of compassion and empathy for the patient, no healthcare organization can go forward, however big it is. That is the DNA of the healthcare, the DNA of the hospital. That DNA comes only when the boss shows more a heart side than a brain side. The brain sides others will take care, but the boss has to show the heart side. So that is what very unique for the healthcare. And another important thing is anybody in life will have 2 or 3 recognition points. One is a recognition by finances, that's a different story. But the second is recognition by the career upswing. That is where if the one guy joins you as a clerk and retires as a clerk, the boss is in fault. So that guy also has to go up in the ladder. That's why I got a special scheme. I got at least 30 to 40 physiotherapists who joined as physiotherapists and who are now deputy general managers or general managers. So you multitask them, you show them different paths, and you tell them that you can do it, and then diversify them into healthcare, and they will be the winners for you.
Okay, so with that, we end today's session. I would like to thank Steve for giving a very unique concept of Indian-ness. And then also I like to thank our esteemed panelists for their views on the leadership and how they apply that in day-to-day practice. So I thank Dr. Parag, Dr. Gurava Reddy, and Dr. Malay for their time, sharing their time with us. And I also thank my other moderators, that's Satyen, Tushar, Ashok, and Neeraj, and also thank OrthoTV. The same program can be viewed again on the OrthoTV. So if you have missed something, please log into the OrthoTV and you will be able to view this program in future also. Thank you once again. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Dhiren. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was pleasure interacting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, Steve.
we still live?